Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for Meridian Spotlight Series webinar featuring ERP Risk Advisors. We'll give it a minute to allow others to join. All right, we are 1 minute after the hour. We'll go ahead and get started. Thanks again for joining Meridian's Partner Spotlight webinar. JT, I'll go ahead and get it handed over to you.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Jenny. Good morning, everyone. We really appreciate everyone being here today for our Spotlight Series webinar. This webinar is part of Meridian's continued Spotlight series, where we highlight one of our key partners that helps us bring NetSuite to market. Today, we are excited to feature ERP Risk Advisors, a risk advisory firm that identifies, manages, and mitigates compliance, cybersecurity, fraud, data security, operational risks, and much more within ERP systems. They'll be sharing insights into how ERP risk advisors and Meridian can change management processes and related controls, define sensitive access risks and segregation of duties conflicts that come up, impact of workflows on certain conflicts, permissions, and much more, as well as some specific NetSuite risk examples and how to navigate them. Now, a little background on Meridian before we get started. As a certified NetSuite solution partner, we specialize in selling, implementing, and providing ongoing managed services support for current and aspiring NetSuite users. Our team also handles business development, process consulting, and full implementation services. In addition to NetSuite, we work with various partner solutions like ERP risk advisors, helping to extend or modify business processes as NetSuite evolves. Our Meridian team holds level 4 certifications with Celigo, enabling us to deliver enhanced flexibility in integrating and automating your workflows. NetSuite is powerful, but no system can do everything, which is why we spotlight our partners like ERP risk advisors that complement and enhance its capabilities. Today, we're excited to have the ERP Risk Advisors team with us, a valuable partner in helping optimize and streamline your organization's processes within NetSuite. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Jeff and Connor now to share more.
Awesome. Well, thanks and welcome everybody as well. We're excited to present our material and to discuss further about our partnership with Meridian. So we've titled this A Guide to a Secure and Compliant NetSuite Environment. We're going to dive right in. Certainly, if you guys have questions as you go throughout the presentation, as we go through the presentation, feel free to chat those and we'll try to address those either in line when we're getting those or towards the end of the presentation. So my name is Jeff Hare. I'm the CEO and founder of ERP Risk Advisors. Have been in the ERP space since 1997. I implemented as a client. I was a divisional controller for a publicly traded company. I implemented another Oracle product, which is Oracle E-Business Suite. And then we'll talk about what we do a little bit more. So I'm also welcomed or also joined by Connor. So Connor, please introduce yourself.
Hey guys, Connor Thompson, been with ERP Risk Advisors for the past 4 years. Helped build up our cyber practice for SaaS systems that we're trying to get out to market here soon. And then also a core competency for me is building access control rule sets, so sensitive access and SOD rule sets for 15 or so different ERP systems at this point in time. So, yep, that's a quick introduction.
Yep, awesome. Thanks, Connor. If you have a certification that requires continuing education, we can provide continuing education for today's webinar. You just need to be aware of interacting, I guess, or with the presentation during 50 minutes of the hour. and then we have a couple poll questions. You need to answer 3 out of the 4 poll questions. The certificate will be issued to you manually. So if you're interested towards the end of the webinar, you can just chat that you'd be interested in one of the poll questions. Will actually allow you to provide that information as well. So we are you could think of us traditionally as competing with traditional risk advisory firms, hence the name ERP Risk Advisors. What we do is a little different than other risk advisory firms. So we compete with like the Big 4 or Tier 2 risk advisory firms. What we say we do is we identify, manage, and mitigate risk. And those risks include compliance, which is typically thought of as Sarbanes-Oxley, cybersecurity, which Connor mentioned. That's a new category, really. A lot of people don't think about cybersecurity risks for the SaaS applications like NetSuite. They think traditional cybersecurity risks are covered by the software provider, in this case NetSuite, and those risks are covered, but there's definitely things that are not covered as part of the SOC 2. So we're going to talk about a few of those things. So compliant cybersecurity, we talk about fraud. So even if you're not an organization that's publicly traded or subject to Sarbanes-Oxley, fraud is something that every organization cares about. So we address fraud risks as well. And then data security, making sure that people only have access to the things they should in your environment. Generally, that's thought of as PII, or personally identifiable information. Sometimes hard to say, sometimes hard to implement. So that's data security as well. So it's not just HCM data, but it includes supplier data and other categories of data. And then we talk about operational risks. So generally, we're implementing controls, we're monitoring that activity and other configuration type risks throughout the life cycle of implementing and managing a ERP system. I will mention that we do, as Connor mentioned, we do SOD and sensitive access risks, role design reviews, if you will, for just about any other product on the market as well. So if NetSuite is your primary ERP application, but you have other ones, or you have sister companies or whatever have other products in the market, such as Workday, ERP Cloud, eBusiness Suite, and so on, we can do SOD and sensitive access analysis. We're generally much cheaper than everybody else. It's a core competency for us, so we feel like we can do it better and more cost effectively than most other products in the market. So we have one big brand that we call ERP Armor. That consists of sub-brands, if you will, roles, rules, licensing, cybersecurity, assessments, managed services, and more. We'll talk about those as we go into a little more detail. And I do have a little cold. I apologize if my voice sounds a little funny, so you have to just bear with me as I get through this. I may mute every once in a while to cough or whatever, but so if I pause for a second, you'll know why I'm not there. So a broad agenda today, we're talking about risks that need to be monitored, examples of risks that related to monitoring controls, change management. We're going to define sensitive access risk and SOD conflicts. We're going to talk about the impact of workflows on sensitive access risk and SOD conflicts. Talk about the types of permission that need to be monitored by related to access controls. We're going to give some specific examples in NetSuite. And then for those that are publicly traded or want to be publicly traded someday, we're going to talk about what we call in-scope risks related to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and then we will end with some examples of standard roles that are over-provisioned or poorly designed. So risks that need to be monitored. We talked about these at the beginning. This is kind of our 5 pillars, if you will: compliance, fraud, operations, cybersecurity, and data security. So which are the folks in the organization that care about those things? So we're mapping those risks to certain stakeholders. Generally speaking, I'm not going to go through all of this, but the C-suite cares about different aspects of these. What we do is we provide services in ongoing monitoring of these risks throughout the entire C-suite. So CFO, CISO, CIO, COO, and the SOX PMO. So the beauty of what we do as a team is we can speak both IT language and talk about IT controls, IT general controls, cybersecurity, and we could speak financial language. So we can talk to the CFO or the SOX PMO and equally, get them up to speed and address the issues related to the risks that are particular to them. So it's kind of like our team is the best of like an IT audit partner in a Big Four and a financial audit partner in a Big Four. So we have one team. It's generally when you're doing business with us for NetSuite, it's generally Connor and I that work together collaboratively, and it's not a big team. We don't have this huge billing backlog of needing to have 5 people on a project like some of our quote unquote competition does. So we're talking about monitoring controls. So monitoring controls are things that need to be monitored, and there's a lot of different controls that need to be monitored throughout the life cycle of an implementation. So we're going to hit a lot on sensitive access risk and segregation duties. People think most compliance risk is segregation duties. We're going to kind of dispel that myth. There are SOD conflicts that need to be reviewed, but most of what we look at in the context of role design and access controls in general is over provisioning of roles, and that is best done by looking at what we call sensitive access risk. So in the context of NetSuite, we have every permission identified. We can look at who has access to any given permission. We would be including in things like bundles and customizations, so that our risk population, quote unquote, is complete. And whether you want to just say, well, who has access to enter and maintain suppliers, who can turn on and turn off MFA configurations, what roles are subject to MFA, for example, or more broadly looking at a combination of risks. So we think of SOD as a combination of risks and sensitive access as individual risks. You also have user access reviews or access certifications that typically get put in to place as well. Often that's done through some type of software product. Maybe it's a NetSuite specific product like StrongPoint, or it's going to be a product that was like an identity management solution that would be looking at recertifying access across multiple systems. Then we have user lifecycle management. So we call that joiners, movers, and leavers. That's granting access, that's changing access, and that is deprovisioning access. So provisioning, deprovisioning roles, global permissions, those are the type of things that are controls that we typically see and implement for clients. Look back procedures is a broad category. It's when you have a control efficiency, like perhaps a late term or somebody having access to some activities that they shouldn't. Auditors will often want or require look back procedures, simply asking the question, did somebody do something with that access when they shouldn't have had it? So that's looking back historically and understanding. And fortunately for organizations using NetSuite, there are decent logs out of the box that can help us perform those look back procedures. Authentication and authorization controls, authenticating, logging in, and then the authorization controls in and around MFA and role design. Next, we want to put monitoring controls around high-risk configurations. So the things that you typically would go through change control. We help clients define what should go through your IT change control process, which generally at a high level is anything that changes the functionality in the system or is tied to a specific control, such as enabling features. And then the last type of monitoring control we typically implement is cybersecurity, monitoring cybersecurity, cyber incidents itself, under evaluating the potential impact or scope of a breach. So the other thing that is really critical for an overall control environment to monitor is some software that can ingest logs. So if you're looking at traditional cybersecurity risk, lots of organizations have a security incident event management system or a SIM system that allows them to take in certain logs. So sign-on logs, for example, for those with administrator access, password changes, those type of things that are very high risk from a cybersecurity perspective, are things that you'd want to be integrated into a SIM. So a lot of smaller organizations don't have a security operations center or a SIM software solution, but yet to monitor certain cybersecurity risks, somebody should be evaluating some of those high risk activities. There's other things that you might want to have proactive monitoring on, whether it's through a SIM or through other processes, things like master data. The easiest one to think about in terms of fraud is controls over the supplier master, data, so bank accounts and check information going out. There's like 5 different fields. The other thing we look at typically is contact information. Who can we contact to verify changes? But there's other things there that are important depending upon your business, including bank setups, item master, employees, pay rates, those type of things. And then there's a broadly category of functional configurations, which are things that are important across all modules, enabling features, workflows, those type of things. Those are all also things that should be monitored to make sure that there are no unauthorized changes. And the other things like foundational configuration, chart of account setup, subsidiaries, company information, and then obviously our forte is security configurations, roles, global permissions, authentication configurations, etc. So we would recommend even for smaller organizations to have, as we'll talk about this a little bit, an IT compliance function. That could be an accountant, depending upon how large your organization is. You may not have a large IT organization, or your IT organization isn't supporting applications or just doing infrastructure supporting and so on. So just because there's an IT role doesn't necessarily mean to be an IT person. So we do realize that in some organizations, NetSuite is implemented without an IT organization. It's implemented by the CFO organization. So what we do is we try to figure out what processes should be implemented, and then what folks in the organization can perform some of that monitoring that is really critical for those 5 categories: fraud, compliance, data security, cybersecurity, and operational risks. All right, so next we're going to talk about change management process. And the challenge with change management, again, not knowing if you're coming from an IT background or a finance or audit background, it's having a broad discussion on what should go through change control. So the type of things that really should be going through change control. So when we talk about change management or the change control process, there should be a structured process. Somebody identifies the change, somebody documents the change, somebody tests the change, and somebody implements the change. And in some cases, somebody verifies the change was made, that was approved, no more, no less. So the type of things that should go through change management: application security changes, which would include role changes, configuration changes like MFA and SSO configurations, IDP configurations, things that are subject to what we call a SDLC process, a software development lifecycle, custom scripts, custom records and fields, custom workflows, other customizations. And then integrations and data management using CSV import configurations, web services and APIs, third-party integrations. And then some of those infrastructure environment managing processes, testing and deployment of changes across environments, sandbox, the refresh of a non-production environment, and then new functionality being deployed in NetSuite via suite scripts and other types of processes as well. So one of the most important things that we like to talk about with organizations is why sensitive access and SOE scans aid in better change management controls. So we're an advocate of customers either running periodic assessments, which certainly should be run at least twice a year with the semi-annual releases that come out. But there may be other things that are driving a need to test SOD and sensitive access. So typically, what we're evaluating are the users that have access to things like they can deploy changes, maintain configurations, maintain integrations, create and maintain customizations, refresh environments. So defining these processes on the front end and making sure that there's the right policies and procedures, and the people have access to these, and the only people have access to these are those that are authorized to make these changes, is critical to have a functioning control environment. So we always talk about the principle of least privilege as the goal, and that means the folks that have access to certain activities are authorized, no more, no less. So that's really the goal of defining the change management process. It's not just the access that people have, but it's the process that includes the documentation of the change, the testing of the change, and then the implementation of the change. So next, I want to talk about SOD conflicts and sensitive access risks. There's probably a lot of people on the call that understand the concept of segregation duties conflicts. If you've been audited by an external auditor or an internal auditor, or you're maybe looking at these things from an implementation perspective, a lot of people understand the concept behind separation of duties or segregation of duties. Not as much, there isn't as much focused on sensitive access risks. That's what we typically see, even from the audit community. It's kind of strange to us, to be honest, that there's not more focus on principle of least privilege. It's very much a compliance viewpoint, and compliance typically looks at segregation duties. So the bottom half of the screen, I'll just start with, common SOD type of activities would be like the separation of the vendor master data, entering and maintaining that, versus processing AP invoices or processing purchase orders. The reality is there are risks with all of those 4 activities in and of themselves. So an unauthorized change to vendor master maintenance, whether that's the name, address, bank account, or contact information, those are all things that should be governed, and a separate control should be defined. So regardless if somebody has a combination of those risks, that is a risk in and of itself. Without going into a lot of detail, there's similar risks on purchase orders. If a PO can be issued, especially where it's a two-way match, that can pose a fraud risk. So depending upon the strength of your vendor master maintenance process, whether or not there's potential fraudulent suppliers in your vendor master database, just issuing a purchase order in and of itself that allows for a two-way match could allow somebody to commit fraud. And then I think everybody would understand the traditional concepts of user provisioning and role customization. To the extent that there's not good controls, you over provision, give too much access to somebody, that could cause a sensitive access risk, that could cause a segregation duties conflict. So I think, Connor, I think I was going to have you talk about the impact of workflow. So I'm going to turn this section over to you.
Sounds good. Yeah, so workflows can definitely mitigate when we're talking SOD conflicts. Generally, they're implemented to prevent a user from entering a transaction and also approving that transaction, or making a change to a configuration and also approving that configuration change. So we generally take that into consideration when we're scoping SOD conflicts and really implementing mitigating controls. So we're getting rid of those false positive SODs where, say, for example, you're worried about a user being able to enter an AP invoice and approve an AP invoice. If there's a good workflow designed and implemented, in this case, maybe by Meridian, where a user can't do both, then that SOD conflict kind of goes out the window due to the workflow control being implemented. And we do this with every client we work with. We will get a complete population of their workflows in whatever ERP system they're working in, and then take that into consideration when looking at SOD conflicts and sensitive access risks to really determine where the risk actually is. And then from there, when we actually identify risk, making the changes that are necessary to mitigate that risk.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. I think just the thing that we see a lot in compliance audits, like Sarbanes-Oxley audits, is a heavy focus on SOD conflicts. But like Connor said, what we often find is workflows are implemented to mitigate those. It's certainly important to evaluate the design of the workflow in order to rely upon that control. But what we don't see is the focus on the abilities to bypass workflows. So Connor, I know that's something that we have built into our rules. How can organizations, how can individual users bypass workflows? Just a couple of examples.
Yeah, when it comes to CSV imports or data being integrated from another system, there are certain configurations within NetSuite that enable that data to come into NetSuite and not be subject to a workflow process that an organization might have been relying upon. And it makes sense in certain instances because you may be relying upon workflows in the source system from which that data is coming from. But in other cases, that might not be the case. And if users happen to have over-provisioned access that you haven't identified, they might be able to undermine a workflow control for various transactions, either through a CSV spreadsheet import or an integration if they happen to have the ability to code or work with APIs.
Yep, that's great. Yeah, I mean, so what we want to do is avoid the ability to override certain controls. In terms of certainly from a compliance perspective, those workflows are key controls and are often tested, but auditors and management doesn't sometimes think about how those workflows can be bypassed. So you could think about this as what we call negative regression testing. When you're testing a workflow and you're validating that it works as intended, you have to also ask yourself, is there a way to either bypass that workflow or to circumvent the workflow in some way? So it's kind of interesting, looking at the audit community. The approach, if you will, for auditing and reviewing workflows is fairly rudimentary. They do the traditional walkthrough from a workflow perspective, but they don't often ask the question, how can the workflow be bypassed? So it's just kind of a mystery to me, to be honest, why there's not more maturity in the audit community. And it's not just through CSV import process, but as APIs and web services as well. All right, so when we're talking about monitoring access controls more broadly, the next topic I want to cover is the types of permissions that need to be monitored by access control software. And again, it may not be that you have to purchase software. You could do this periodically. We offer assessments on a periodic basis that eliminates the need in the short run to be able to have software. We feel like there's a value for software, so we kind of use the analogy. You want to go from crawl phase to walk phase to run phase. And for some organizations, they just want a periodic once a year, maybe semi-annually kind of point in time analysis. Other organizations are wanting to more proactively manage those risks. So like if they're provisioning users, they want to monitor for SOD conflicts that may be implemented, or to make sure that the user that gets access to a role doesn't get something they shouldn't. So sensitive access risk associated with it. So the type of permissions, and like I said in the very beginning, when we help implement a program, a security controls program, we want to monitor a full population of everything. So all permissions, all bundles, all custom objects. We want to do all of that, and we typically do as part of either an assessment or the implementing and supporting of a software solution. So the examples here: master data, employees, suppliers, customers and items, and then transactions. We want to know who has access, although having access in and of itself doesn't pose a risk because, like we said, sometimes those risks are mitigated through workflow design. And then there's just functional configurations throughout the application. And then foundational configurations and security. This is kind of a slide we covered earlier. So I'm just kind of recapping the type of things that we monitor. Other activities, upload and integration abilities. We want to know who has access to spreadsheet imports, mass uploads, conversion processes, web services, and APIs. A lot of these are typically not something that are needed after go live. It may be that you're doing conversion processes and you're using spreadsheet imports, but there are maybe some use cases for maybe you're buying another company and there's a temporary need for that, or there's a bulk load of AP invoices that have to come from another system that isn't done through integration. So sometimes there are justifications for these abilities, but even in the case where there's manual uploads of data, like a bulk upload of invoices, you'll want to have controls in place to make sure that the data files related to that didn't get manipulated. So what was intended to be uploaded and paid is done, and no more, no less. All right, Connor, I think I'm going to let you cover these next couple slides. I'm getting a little groggy here with my my throat. So I want to talk about REST and SOAP web services.
Yep, sounds good. Sounds good, Jeff. Yeah, so when we're evaluating user access and role access, we'll generally take a look at who has access to perform web service operations, and then on top of that, what transactional permissions they have, just to determine if maybe they don't need web services at all, if there's no need to be integrating data from other systems, or if they do, and then making the valid changes based on that. We'll also take a close look at who has the ability to export and import sensitive data, whether that be through a CSV import process or a web service API integration, just because that data is generally considered sensitive, and we don't want users to be able to leak that data in an unauthorized manner if they shouldn't have access to it in the first place, or shouldn't be integrating that data in and out of NetSuite. In terms of the vendor's permission in NetSuite, there is no entry and approval object for vendor master data. So we generally take a close look at what roles and users have access to vendor master data right off the bat. A lot of standard roles within NetSuite have unauthorized access to maintain vendor master data. Jeff, you're sharing, just so you know.
Sorry, I was trying to get to polls. So.
Oh, gotcha.
Go ahead. Yeah, I'll take a poll next. Yep.
Yep. So when we're just for an example of vendor master data, since it can't be controlled through role design, no entry and approval permissions, we'll generally implement a control that's either a workflow in and around that. And Meridian probably has great experience with that. So whoever your system integrator is can assist you with that. And then if a workflow doesn't make sense for your organization, we'll generally just put an independent check of audit logs, since NetSuite's audit logging is fairly comprehensive. So on a periodic basis, you're validating that no users have made unauthorized changes to vendor banking data, contact information, address information, or any other fields that would be considered sensitive and could present a fraud risk. And with that, we launch in a poll.
Go ahead and explain this. I'm still trying to figure out polls and teams. So
I've got your first question. I have launched
got
on
her
the
back.
screen. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So can everybody see this poll? All right. All right, sounds good. We'll give everybody just a second. So if you're wanting CPE, is your organization currently considering a digital transformation project? So in general, we just like to understand who's got an active project in place. Maybe it's implementing another version of what's NetSuite, or doing some enhancements. So give just a second to respond to this. And I guess we could maybe launch the second poll. I'm not quite sure how that works.
Question number 2 should be on the screen now.
All right, sounds good. So we typically find a lot of reason why we do webinars like this is these digital transformation projects, the implementation of ERP systems. They're challenging, and so part of our goal is to get ahead of these challenges and make sure people are really well versed at how to implement them effectively and efficiently. So sometimes, like as we talked about, some of these security challenges, the monitoring roles and monitoring controls in general don't always get done as part of the implementation. So sometimes there's some work that needs to be done post implementation by clients or by companies such as us. So yeah, I mean, we're just trying to understand maybe who's part of has been a part of a project, and we always like to kind of get a feel for whether or not they feel like there has been a successful project. And we'll go ahead and launch the third poll now, and then we'll do the fourth poll right as we finish up the webinar. All right. And I guess we can close that poll now. So I think we've covered this slide. We'll just transition from here to this next section here. As Connor mentioned, ability to mass import data via CSV spreadsheets. What we're going to highlight is some of the standard roles to having access to permissions outside their job function. So we're going to highlight a couple examples as we get in the next couple sections. So the next thing I want to talk about is what we call in-scope SOX risks. And if you are a publicly traded company or a company that's thinking about going public, what I would say is what you want to do in the context of interacting with your external auditors is assert what are your in-scope SOX risks, and you want to present management's assessment of risk. And there's an art to that. So in the context of building a risk and controls matrix, there are manual controls, there are IT dependent controls, and there's ITACs, IT application controls. What we do is we like to work with organizations that have developed their risk and control matrix to identify specifically what is quote unquote in scope from a Sarbanes-Oxley perspective. Or if you're not publicly traded, helping work with you to say what are the risks that management really cares about, what are they, kind of the die in the sword things that they want to make sure that are implemented. So typically that starts from a company's RACM or risk and controls matrix, and there are manual mitigating controls that can be implemented, such as reviewing and approving changes to vendors, or like if you're looking at a segregation duties conflict for the vendor master maintenance and creating purchase orders, like this first example is, you may have a approval process in and around supplier master, workflow approval process, and you may have a workflow approval process in and around purchase orders. So the reality is, if those workflows are designed effectively, there is not a risk to the organization that somebody's going to be able to enter and maintain a supplier and enter and maintain a workflow, being they can't do that of themselves without somebody else reviewing and approving those activities. So there's other things like entering sales orders, air invoices. Maybe there's some sort of analysis on sales, budget to actual review, a flux analysis, forecast, tracking of revenue recognition against contract terms, and so on. So there's often manual mitigating controls that help mitigate some of the access control risks. The ideal scenario is to implement as many workflows as possible, but there's a balance, and there's a cost obviously to implement more workflows, and then there's a balance of just managing and maintaining those on an ongoing basis. So in summary, what we typically do is we work with senior management on IT. Maybe it's the CIO and the CFO, or maybe just the CFO, to say, based upon your risk and controls matrix, what should be the sensitive access risks and segregation duties that are relevant to the audit. And instead of the auditors, forget the term, but what external auditors typically do is they throw a bunch of crap up on the wall and see what sticks, instead of having a discussion with management, or instead of management having a discussion with auditors more clearly that says, based upon our controls overall environment, these are the SOD conflicts and the sensitive access risks that are relevant, or this is also the mitigating controls, whether they're manual mitigating controls and workflow processes that make those risks benign, if you will, in an average organization. The next section we want to talk about is really the heart of what we typically see in NetSuite environments is the principle of least privilege isn't always followed in the context of implementations, and then there is often some segregation of duties. So we're going to go through a couple of examples. In AP, in the seated roles, there's really only one AP clerk role. Typically, in larger organizations in particular, you'll have somebody else. You have one group entering and maintaining suppliers. Sometimes there's a separate group entering and maintaining invoices, and there's a third group that does entering and maintaining invoices or paying bills. So the AP clerk role, obviously, if you're providing that to somebody, would be giving somebody all three of those components: the ability to maintain vendors, and then you could just see the other things highlighted here in yellow that typically are something that an AP clerk or AP clerks in general should have access to. So typically what we need to do is have a discussion with the client and say, what does your team look like? What are your operational objectives? How big is your team? What workflows are implemented? What monitoring controls are implemented? And then that helps drive the segregation of, or the breaking apart of a role like the AP clerk. So like I said, sometimes we'll have an AP manager role that may oversee the activities. There's a supplier maintenance role. There is a invoice entry role and a payments role. There are cases where we can use multiple roles, assign those to users, especially where there's adequate mitigating controls like approval workflows already implemented. But there's no one size fits all. I mean, clearly a highly over provisioned role like an AP clerk role is not the best case. And so on the right hand side, you see some of the things we've highlighted that would not be appropriate for an AP clerk to have access to. Obviously, a couple of examples: editing purchase orders, having editability to receive orders, item receipts, managing, editing the bill of materials. Those are things that would not be appropriate for an average AP clerk. The buyer role out of the box has the ability to edit vendors, which typically is not allowed. That is a pretty normal segregation duties. So separating the entry and maintenance of suppliers or vendors from the entry and maintenance of purchase orders. And then you can see a bunch of other things. Even the receiving of order typically is not done by a buyer. There's normally in a three-way match scenario, why you have a three-way match is you want somebody independent of the buyer to validate that the goods or services have been received. But you can see, a buyer certainly shouldn't be maintaining bills, often is not influencing bill of materials. That's sometimes an engineering function, and then wouldn't be editing vendors or vendor returns. So that's some examples. Hopefully you've gotten some ideas of things that maybe you have some work to do or need some help on from either us or Meridian. Certainly implementing more workflows would be a great use of Meridian resources. We could certainly work with Meridian if they're performing some managed services. So in summary, what we do is we have these kind of 5 pillars here. We have learning. We have the ability so learning is just giving you an understanding, a better understanding of your environment. Especially if you're auditors, we have a couple classes that would be beneficial for you to have a better understanding of what the risks are in NetSuite. We have 2 classes, one that is called Foundational Concepts. Another one is Auditing IT General Controls. If you're unaware maybe of the risks related to cybersecurity, we have a cybersecurity assessment and ongoing monitoring that we can help you guys do in and around cybersecurity risks. Risk and compliance is broad. I mean, that could be Sarbanes-Oxley, that could be fraud. A lot of what we do in helping clients either during an implementation is fully customized roles. We want to make sure that roles are least privilege and address both on sensitive access and segregation duties conflicts. So I think we're at time. We have a few minutes if there's any questions.
I am not seeing any questions in the Q&A, but I do have that last poll if you're ready for that whenever.
Yep, let's go ahead and launch that. That'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you have a certification requires CPE, we'll get the answer to this. Even if for some reason you don't have, if you don't respond to this, you can still reach out to us and we'll still issue CPE at any given point in time. So I think there's one more slide. Well, you saw Conrad's contact information there as well, so you can always email us with any questions. And then last but not least, I guess there's 2 more slides. You guys ready? Have a couple recap slides here.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Connor, so much. Great job. Really appreciate kind of comprehensive overview there. And thank you all for participating and attending in the webinar today. And thank you for all the insights into ERP risk advisors and how to leverage your solutions for different ERP solutions and more specifically NetSuite. And we know there's a lot to digest, so if you're interested in learning more, please feel free to reach out to ERP Risk Advisors team. Their contact information was just up on that slide, or the Meridian team directly. And also please follow Meridian on LinkedIn for upcoming announcements for our next Spotlight webinar featuring Blue Ridge. That will be on April 3rd of next month, and a recording and blog summary from today's webinar that will be shared in the following days. If you'd like to explore Meridian's NetSuite practice or get in touch with any of our partners, please feel free to visit our website or contact me directly, whatever's easiest for you. My information's up on the screen now. Just wanted to thank Jeff, Connor, and the rest of the ERP Risk Advisor team again for the comprehensive overview, and to everyone who attended. We really look forward to seeing you at our next webinar, and hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Thanks, JT.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.